Hello, my name's Libertas. That's Latin for Liberty Man. I'm an award-winning constitutional historian. I wrote this book here called In God We Trusted, the U.S. Constitution and the Restoration of America, and I got a 2014 Christian Writers Award for it. You can get it at our website that will have the link below, and you can get it also at any online retailer at present. Anyway, I'm going to share something that's tonight that's one of my favorites, just absolute favorites. I get to go to Williamsburg and work there with some of the greatest people in America. But I'm going to show you how Thomas Jefferson was educated, how he went from being a teenager to how he was trained and taught to become the man that he was. And we don't know, we know the end result of their lives, but we don't know how they became who they were. And it's real simple. They were educated to think the way they thought. I mean, they put the Declaration of Independence together in just a matter of a couple of days. And it was unanimous with all 13 colonies. They put the U.S. Constitution together in about 8 weeks. Now we can't even get our legislature to balance a budget. So with that in mind, I'm going to start out. I'm going to show you a little slideshow of some pictures, and then I'm going to go back and I'm going to go through the slideshow frame by frame and explain to you what they are. But these are real places where things really happened, and they look as close to historically accurate for 1776 as the restoration team at Williamsburg can possibly get it. And the people, the reenactors that are there, are walking museums of who they were. So I was taught all these things by the head lady of the house as she was giving me the tour. So I hope y'all get out of it as much as I have gotten out of it, and we'll see. And I'll tie it into modern day for an event that happened today on April the 12th, 2021, and you can see in living proof why we need to change things in our country if we're going to have any chance at getting back to original constitutionalism. So here we go. This is the George Wythe home in Colonial Williamsburg. It's right next to the governor's mansion if you ever go there. This is George Wythe's personal study. Although it's his personal study, you see that there's more than one table, more than one chair around the table. He would regularly have legislators for the colony of Virginia come there, discuss legislation, discuss legal cases, discuss how to debate and fight back against Parliament in Great Britain back in this era on constitutional grounds. It wasn't just a philosophical debate, it was the nitty-gritty down to earth constitutionality of what Great Britain was doing and what we claimed that they were doing wrong. So anyway, this is George Wythe's thing. Now, George Wythe took a liking to young Thomas Jefferson when he went to William and Mary College, which is right here in Colonial Williamsburg. That college was one of the first three founded in America, and I believe it was in the 1680s or 90s, somewhere in that time frame. It was, way, way back. It's very old, very prestigious school. So anyway, most of the Virginia delegation to the Continental Convention and Continental Congresses were graduates of that school. So when George Wythe met Thomas Jefferson, he offered him a tutorship. And he says, I will teach you what you need to know personally. So this is the classroom in George Wythe's home where he would teach his students, and he would only take a few at a time because he was a very busy man, but he understood to finding faithful men who will be able to teach others also. So this is what he did for Thomas Jefferson. But if you'll notice, look at this table. You see this piece of metal here. So he's teaching them geology. You've got this here. This is ancient architecture. This is, I guess you would consider, butterflies. Here's a plant. You have botany. Over here is ancient history. All of these different things here are more pages and papers like this, but we're going to come back to this massive book right here as we move through the frames. The next frame here is we see this very, very exquisite microscope. To be able to own a microscope like this in America in 1776 is just astounding, because this would have to be imported and it's extremely expensive. So it just shows you some of the wealth of George Wythe and what he was willing to do as a volunteer tutor. Thomas Jefferson did not pay him for his services. This book right here, when I asked, because you can't read the spine the way they've got it set here, but I wasn't telling them, you need to turn that book around so we can see what it is. But I asked the lady that was in charge, and she said, oh, that's the Bible, of course. And I'm like, what do you mean, of course? She goes, that's the most important book there is. How are you going to know the laws of nature and nature's God if you don't know this? Over here, you learn about God's nature, and here you learn about God's revelation. And just dismissed it off, and like, of course. Why would you have anything else? But also here you see the quill pens, to where they were, they practice handwriting. Their handwriting is some of the finest calligraphy that you'll ever see. And so that's part of his education. But as she very defiantly taught us that this book right here, the Holy Bible, was the most important aspect of the education. Now we move over here, and this is inside the Capitol building at Colonial Williamsburg. This is the actual table, chairs, and room where the congressional committees, which they call it the House of Burgesses. So just like today, when they were going to discuss a law, this is the committee room where the select committee who was working on whatever the issue was, this is where they would get together in a small group, and they would discuss whatever it was they were going to present to the full body of the legislature. And so these here are the notes of the order of the day, whatever the topic was. I didn't really pay attention much to it. But the tour guide, this gentleman here, he's explaining about these 4 books here was their entire law library. Now, if you've ever been in a lawyer's office today, there's just the whole wall back here in the back would just be a bookshelf full of law books, case law, and all these kind of things. And he said, no, this is their whole library. This right here is the colonial charter and the statute laws of the colony of Virginia, beginning in like 1609 up till 1776. And here's another book that's more along what we would call case law, case statute law, from the courts. This was the capital city of Virginia in its day, and so most of the lawsuits would take place at the court here, especially the big ones. So this is the case law book, and here again, it's not much bigger than a moleskin journal. But you have these two books over here. One of them's a little bit bigger than the other one, obviously. And so we're going to go to the next page. And I asked the guy, because there was, and obviously I'm here taking the picture and I can't see what the books are. So I asked him, can you explain what these two books were? I was a little anxious. He was going to explain it anyway, but he opened them up and showed me that this one here is the Book of Common Prayer for the Anglican Church. Virginia was a crown colony. They had a crown appointed governor at the time. And so their established religion is what they called it. The established religion of the colony was the Anglican Church, what we call today the Episcopal Church, but the Church of England, where the king was the head of the church as well as the state. So, but also you see here, this is the Holy Bible. And it says right here, approved for the use in the churches. Approved. Approved. And if you know anything about the King James Version of the Bible, King James had his own Bible printed in 1611, and he called it the Authorized Version. And what that means, the British citizens are authorized to read this Bible, but if you would read the Geneva Bible or some of the other Bibles that were being printed in Europe by men like Zwingli, Calvin, Knox, Luther, any of those Bibles, you could be burned at the stake or worse. So anyway, and so I asked the honest question, what do these books have to do with legislation? And he just, again, very matter-of-factly, well, you can't make any laws that contradict these two books. And he said, it's the laws of nature and nature's God. No human law can contradict what God says about it. It just doesn't make any sense. And so if they have to make sure that the legislation that they're putting together is going to be in line, in harmony with the scriptures. And if there's nothing in the Bible about what they're talking about, then they would use these other references over here. And also, most of those things had already been through this type of scrutiny to become passed and become law anyway. So I'm sitting there going, boy, that is really something else. Then we go back to this one over here. So what's the point? Why does this matter? Well, if you go over here, there's another picture of the same thing, a little bit closer so that you can read it a little bit better here. This is the Declaration of Independence, and this is on the other side of the table where George Wythe educated and tutored Thomas Jefferson. So they display this piece of paper on the education table to let you know that this document is the result of the tutorship of George Wythe. the father of American jurisprudence. There's three other judges that were given the title a father of American jurisprudence, but George Wythe was given the title of the father of American jurisprudence. He was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Virginia at the time. But the result of all of this and the committee room and all that training that Thomas Jefferson went through, the result of this was, you can call this maybe his diploma, was the Declaration of Independence. And the Declaration of Independence declares in the first paragraph that our rights as a citizen of the United States of America are endowed by our Creator. And that is a legal phrase and a legal document. There's another video that we have out called Are You Smarter Than a First Grader? I encourage you to read it because I go into detail the definition of these phrases. But it's endowed by our Creator. It's a legal definition with a legal phrase, a legal purpose. And it's simply, man is a created being and he must be subject to the laws of his Creator. The next clause in question here, with going back to the table, the committee table, and why you have the Bible on the education table and the committee table of government, is the laws of nature and nature's God. The legal definition of that clause is basically exactly what the house, the lady head of the house explained about the classroom, and then the same thing that the tour guy explained about the legislature. But the laws of nature and nature's God comes out of their law textbook at the time that they would use in college, called Blackstone's Commentaries of the Laws of England. And in the introductory chapter of that 4-volume work, it defines the laws of nature and nature's God, which is simply, no human law is valid if it contradicts these. Any human law that contradicts anything that is plainly written in the Old and New Testaments of the Holy Bible is void and must be disobeyed. So that's a lot. That's a mouthful, guys. But I hope you got a grasp on what it was that I just showed you. In American jurisprudence, in American law, that we see here from the tutoring and the educating of Thomas Jefferson, the result of that tutorship and him being a legislature is the Declaration of Independence that declares to the world that in America, no human law is valid if it contradicts the Bible. So you might ask yourself, well, what's the big deal? Well, I'm fixing to show you, because something happened today that I think is just so apropos to this. And so I'm going to share this with you. Let me pull it up so I can share the screen. Why is it not pulling this one up? Well, maybe you can see this, maybe you can't. I'm going to read it. This is from the Beltway Report, and this happened in the House of Representatives today between Representative Greg Steube of Florida and Jerry Nadler, the Democrat congressman that's the head of the committee, that they were discussing this legislation. It says, during the debate yesterday over the Equality Act, a measure that would create a right to kill babies in abortions and force Americans to fund abortions, Republicans accuse Democrats of ignoring biblical values. As a surprising comment from pro-abortion Democrat Congressman Jerry Nadler confirmed that to be true. Part of the debate over the pro-abortion measure revolved around sex and gender issues that Representative Greg Steube of Florida upset Democrats when he confirmed God makes boys and girls unique. When men or women claim to be able to choose their own sexual identity, they are making a statement that God did not know what he was doing when he created them, the congressman said. The gender confusion that exists in our culture today is a clear rejection of God's good design. Whenever a nation's laws no longer reflect the standards of God, that nation is in rebellion against him and will inevitably bear the consequences. The congressman said, "We are seeing the consequences of rejecting God here in our country today." That promoted a rather shocking comment from Nadler. What any religious tradition describes as God's will is no concern of this Congress. Now, I'm going to read that again, and you keep in mind what it was that I just showed you. What any religious tradition describes as God's will is no concern of this Congress. Folks, I can't make that stuff up. I can't make any of this stuff up. I'm not that smart of a person. I just read a lot of books. I mean, I read a ton of books. But I just showed you the Declaration of Independence and a couple of key phrases and how Thomas Jefferson was educated. And it was not my opinion of what I was presenting to you. This is what the reenactors at Colonial Williamsburg were teaching me when I was there. This is the classroom. This is how it works. These are the books. These are the tools. This is what they did. Here's the legislative room over here and how they use the Bible to craft their legislation. And the end result of all of that was the Declaration of Independence that declares that no human law is valid if it contradicts the Bible. So when when Stubbe brings that up here in the legislature today, Jerry Nadler says what the Bible says is of no concern of this Congress. So keep that in mind. Think about that. Contemplate this. Go back and read it, listen to this, archive it, go over it again and again, because this is what we face. If we're going to make America great again, we've got to go back and we've got to train our people to think and act like Thomas Jefferson, so that we could put legislation together that would change the world like the Declaration of Independence. Anyway, when people swear allegiance to the republic in which it stands, they're swearing allegiance to that Declaration of Independence and the way it was originally written. So God bless, enjoy the day and your night, whatever you may be doing. And I look forward to seeing you again. Bye.